Welcome to Advocacy Exchange, Navigating Injury Texas Law.
Hey everyone, welcome back to an all-new episode of Advocacy Exchange, Navigating Texas Injury Law with Paul Littleton. I'm your host, Mike Leon. Paul here is the Director of Business Development and Operations over at the Littleton Law Firm, where he helps guide strategy, client communication, and case management all across the firm. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about what types of evidence actually changes the outcome of an injury case. Paul's going to explain all that in just a second. Paul, it's good to see you as always, my friend. When you look at these injury cases that kind of move forward smoothly versus the ones like we've talked about in previous episodes that maybe stall, what kinds of evidence tends to make the biggest difference early on?
Usually we find that the evidence regarding like open records, whether it be like 911 transcripts, body camera footage from the officers, they're very, very helpful. Simply because when you're there on the scene and you're telling the officer what happened, it's usually most correlated with the truth, at least as far as accuracy, versus that when you're trying to give a recorded statement that's definitely going to free you of any negligence, 30 days later. And so, especially if you're doing depositions or testimony much later than that, those 911 cameras or body cameras can actually factor in and be like very lethal to the case itself and help pursuing it or killing the other side and what their defense is. But usually, the open records kind of help us out the most.
Paul, staying on that, so would you say that it's not really about the amount of evidence that's collected, it's more about the quality, relevance of what is?
Oh, definitely, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so then in that vein, how does the timing affect as well the value of the evidence, especially in the immediate aftermath, days or weeks right after the accident?
So for the timing, that is a tricky question because everything is just a little bit different now than it used to be. So for any existing criminal element, the government would like, or local agencies would like for that to be finished, for there to be a resolution to that prior to the release of any public records. And so sometimes if a person or a party in the accident was given a ticket, they want to withhold the body camera footage or a lot of things just on that premise of waiting till the ticket is either found guilty or not guilty, depending on the circumstance. And sometimes that can take a few months to be able to do, especially if the person resets things a little bit. So that can be a little bit of a problem. But the whole idea is that you want to get those requests early on because the government is not liable to keep those records forever, and every local agency can be a little bit different in terms of how they handle and store things. So you want to get your request in, you want to keep up maintaining to follow up and see the status of those requests and to make sure that you pay the invoice for those records appropriately, because that's all going to be key to coming in when it can come in.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about those objective records, the reports and things that you were mentioning? Like what role does all of that kind of play, whether it's, because it's objective records compared to like personal accounts of actually what happened?
So so for example, we have a client that's got into a motor vehicle accident and the police come to the scene and the police are hearing both sides of the story and using their training to kind of decipher who they believe would be at fault for the accident. Sometimes you will have people that get involved in accidents that may not know exactly what happened at the time just because their adrenaline is pumping. They're a little bit shocked or scared. They don't know what's going on. This is their first time. Sometimes you have it where, they're completely lying or trying to cover up something, but they just may be a better liar than, our client, for example, who's telling the truth or more convincing. And so when you get the body camera footage, for example, you're able to see what they told the officer and how convincing it really was, and whether or not it correlates to things like, for instance, 911 transcripts. Like the officer does not know at the time that somebody may have called it in, they've seen the accident, but they didn't stay. And that happens a lot. So when you're turning around and having those transcripts of these potential witnesses that may have been behind our client or behind the defendant or wherever, and they give their account as to what happened, then you've got a completely different dynamic, especially in something like a word versus word case where it's not clear, exactly what happened. Another thing is EDR data, which is event data recorder from the vehicles, and most cars, most newer cars, they all have this ability It does have to be extracted by an expert, but those things are able to tell us factors like when the client braked, what speed they were going to, when their sensors went off, a lot of the internal functions that they were operating in the car at the time of the accident, things like that. And so you kind of put all those together, then you're able to kind of get a factored story with actual uh, an actual investigation and actual evidence rather than just the variance of our client's word or the defendant's word, which is totally subjective to their past experiences or personalities and stuff.
Yeah. Have you seen, you gave the example about the newer car data and things like that, but have you seen inconsistencies in evidence over your time and how it impacted how insurance companies view the claim themselves, even if there is a legitimate injury that occurred at that accident?
There are some inconsistencies which can factor into, the evidence and the circumstances that do kind of discredit the actual evidence or the merit of the evidence itself. And I'll use one example. We had a defendant who said that it was a hit and run accident, and they took the plate down of his new BMW, and we tracked it down, and we ended up suing him. And he says that the vehicle was in his possession the entire time and was never involved in a car accident. Period. Which was a little bit odd. So when we ran reports, we saw that his vehicle was definitely involved in an accident on the day of the accident, because there was information like on public records, open sources like Carfax, for example, that showed that the vehicle was involved in an accident. Later on, we found that Carfax and those open source reporting agencies actually pull from police reports, and the police report was just a recital of what our client had informed the officers about the hit and run. So it wasn't a verifiable piece of evidence to show that the vehicle was damaged at the time. So you do have circumstances like that where open records can kind of lend towards a non-accurate assessment and kind of hurt the case.
Yeah. Kind of staying on that, how can in some cases, or have you seen that like the same piece of evidence or information is being interpreted differently depending upon how it's presented? Have you seen that? Why does context matter in that regard?
Well, it matters greatly, especially in the bodily injury claim, because the whole premise of it is that the insurance adjuster typically believes that what they would feel or how they would experience something is how everyone would do the same. And they often feel that everyone's biology is the same, and it's not. So, two 40-year-old men don't have the same biology. They don't have the same makeup. And as a result of that, they're going to handle things much differently, in terms not only just their management of pain, but also their threshold of what can actually cause an injury and how far it can go. So there's definitely some likeness in terms of the way the insurance company feels common sense should play a role. And when they do that, they like to say that they don't believe that the injury was as the doctors described. They don't believe that the treatment was necessary given what they feel should have happened for our client or to our client. And that is just a huge error. Time and time again, after doctors and experts will let you know everybody is different. Just
Yeah.
everybody is different.
When you've looked back yourself at cases where the outcome kind of shifted significantly, what are some pieces of evidence that tended to change how the case was kind of viewed compared to how it looked at the start?
Well, I'll give you I'll give you another example. We had a client who never went to the doctor and only went to the hospital a few times in her life, for like kidney infection, appendicitis, things like that, just non-related to an injury. As a result, there was one time that she believed that she might be having a heart attack and or something might be wrong with her chest, and so the doctors did X-rays. Subsequently, they also captured her neck in that X-ray. And the presentation of that X-ray, as it relates to what she went in for, would have been easy to explain to a jury. But the way that they had presented that X-ray, it was like she went in for a neck problem. That's why that X-ray captured her neck. So like there was a pre-existing condition, which is the reason why she shouldn't be paid out in full, right? Um, it was a little bit of an unorthodox situation, but those types of the presentation of evidence can land or imply a story. And a lot of people, like, they wouldn't believe that, oh, you've never been to a doctor for anything because you're so healthy, you don't look it, or you're old, or you're overweight. So they're going to disassimilate that easily, and they're going to assume that the client is just wanting to get rich because obviously there's this X-ray, you can't defute that. So but in either case, that was kind of like an example of way the evidence was presented really impacted the case when it really had no bearing on the truth.
Yeah. Paul, as we kind of wrap on this episode, for someone that is listening to this episode and they have been injured in an accident, what should they understand about why early focused evidence collection can really help shape the entire direction of their case?
If you've been involved in an accident and you do not have a team, or your attorney's office isn't really focused on the evidence, then they're really shortchanging you, because the story, as you mentioned, they can flip at any given time. And I'll give you an example. If the adjuster turns around and asks when you saw the defendant's vehicle first, if you turn around and you say, well, I didn't see it, then she's going to assert you weren't paying attention, which is a part of your responsibility as a driver in the state of Texas. If you say that you did see it, then she's going to ask you, why did you not avert the accident? If you saw it, you saw it was coming, how come you didn't do anything to avoid it? Those types of things are placed in order to try to trick you to get contributory negligence, trying to give some sort of fault your way or deny the claim completely. And the evidence of how it's all put together and presented is key in getting that liability accepted so that you can get and pursue and preserve your rights. If your attorney's office isn't doing that, then they're not doing their job. They can't just expect to present the claim, hope everything lands well, and then follow through and pursue your damages. I know that it does take a lot of legwork and man hours. I know it's not always easy. It is time consuming and it does cost money, but it is definitely worth it. And as far as considering the integrity of your claim, it's not a negotiable item.
Yeah, it's definitely worth it. Paul, I can't thank you enough for the time and the insights and kind of explaining all this to the audience. Appreciate it.
Not a problem. Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of Advocacy Exchange, navigating Texas injury law. I'm going to sound like the billboard again, folks. If you've been injured and you have questions about how evidence can affect the outcome of your case, do me a favor. Visit the team at Littleton Law Firm by going to littletonlawfirm.com right now to learn more or schedule a consultation with Paul and the team. One more favor before you head out: hit like, hit subscribe, leave a review, comment, share the episode with someone who needs to hear it. I'm Mike Leon. We'll see everybody next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.